Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, brought to you by Music Ally, the show that both looks at the finances of the music industry while also bringing you stories and comments about the past week in the pop business. He's Stuart Dredge. I'm Steve Lemack. If you want an easy guide to what's going on in the music industry and how it all works, then here we are every week. This week, is passive listening on streaming services killing the UK music scene? Also, a new live music festival is coming to a town near you soon. Spotify announces how much it's paid out to British artists in the past year, and what is radio plugging. But first, with his eye-watering stat of the week, here's Mr. Dredge with a huge number, which this week is...
This is 981 million. And that is how many people, neither of which is me or you, have listened to the music of Brazilian Phonk producer Slaughter last month.
What? Before we go any further, what is Phonk?
What is Phonk? Yeah. Phonk, it's a genre that's kind of under the radar of a lot of people. It's kind of a subgenre of like hip hop and trap music with a bit of jazz thrown in. And it's very big online and it's big in the gaming world. So if you spend a lot of time watching gaming TikToks or Twitch streams, you'll hear a lot of it. But it's not like something that's maybe as mainstream. And yeah, Slaughter is this Russian producer who now lives in Brazil, which is the big heartland for funk. And there was this New York Times article with YouTube talking to them about it, saying, yeah, he reached 981 million people in the last month. And to put that in context, on YouTube, Taylor Swift reached about just under 400 million people last month.
Right.
And Bad Bunny. So this guy who kind of a lot of people have never heard of is the biggest in terms of being heard on YouTube. But that's the key point, really. His music is in the background of a lot of videos and YouTube shorts. So a lot of people are hearing him, which is different from people choosing to listen to him. But yeah, possibly the most listened to artist in the world last month.
That is something we'll come back to in just a moment. But the three top talking points of the week, which we've picked out for you. Well, here's one which comes back to a subject we talk a lot about on this podcast, grassroots venues. Because in the absence of a Glastonbury festival this year, the Music Venue Trust is launching a nationwide alternative to Glastonbury, an alternative to the legendary field-based festival, which will take place in local venues around the country. It's called Everywhere at Once, which will be, I think the tagline is, the UK's biggest music festival on your doorstep. It's organised by the MVT, Save Our Scene and the Association of Independent Promoters. It's backed by the National Lottery, and that's about nearly all we know. I think there's going to be, I think the figures are 1,200 gigs they're hoping to put on across the country in 500 venues during the final weekend of June. And I think this is another really good idea on a lot of levels, really, because, I mean, obviously it'll raise the profile of local venues, which is always good to do. But it'll also hopefully bring in some trade during what's become, it's quite a lean period for small venues. Traditionally, we always used to look at the start of the year when everyone was skint after Christmas and worry about how local venues would meet their bills at the end of January. But there are things going on now, and of course, it's Independent Venue Week happens in January as well. But more worryingly for a lot of venues, they lose audience due to the festivals during the summer. They lose artists as well, because the artists are all booked to play at festivals, or there are clauses in the contracts of the festivals that you can't play local venues nearby and that sort of thing. So they lose bands and artists, and as I say, a lot of people, they go to less gigs because they're spending their money on festivals. So it is a sort of lean period, which hopefully, this will help redress the financial balance in a way. So at least for one weekend, and that weekend is June the 26th to the 28th. More details to follow. Here's another one as our second story which we picked out for you. You may have already seen this, but talking of live music, this came up last week. The team behind the historic Sheffield venue, the Leadmill, are looking for a new home, and they've started crowdfunding to get fans involved so they can open a new Leadmill. I think that's the idea, isn't it?
Is it? And it sounds strange, doesn't it? Because it's easy to think of a venue as the building. But in this case, the people running the gigs were not the people who owned the building. And there was a parting of the ways last year. And yeah, so, I mean, they want to move it somewhere else, and they're looking for location. And this crowdfunding campaign is all about the fact they haven't got any money from the council, they haven't got any government grants. They really want to power it all by fans chipping in. And so this crowdfunding campaign, I think you can chip in, it's like £5, £10 or £20 or whatever you can afford. And they're trying to raise £30,000 to kind of cover the costs and deposits and actually kitting it out. So it launched last week. And at the moment, I looked this morning, it's raised over £7,000. So that's a decent start because it's got like 77 days left. It's quite a long campaign.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like a lot of money to me, £30,000 as a starter, but but again, maybe it's a realistic target to just, as you say, set the ball in motion. I guess. And
there is a bit of a gap as well. Like, cause I think it's 391 people have chipped in so far, and one of the stats in the announcement was that more than 10 million people have been to concerts at Leadmill over the last 45 years. So there's definitely room there to get a few more of those people to chip in, and maybe the artists too. You know, some of the artists who played them on the way up. Yeah,
maybe what they need is, and if you're a super fan, you'll already know this from our lock-in from last week. But the Margate venue, where else I think they may have finished fundraising now, but they set a target of £40,000 to keep the venue alive, and part of that, because the last time I looked, they were up to £38,000, I think, but part of that was down to the fact that Bob from Pavement had given them a gold disc for Pavement's Harness Your Hopes, which went for more than £7,000. That one item alone in a charity auction for where else? I think it was £7,500 for Bob from Pavement's gold disc. So if anyone at the Leadmill still has anything Arctic Monkeys related they'd like to auction off, that's the way to go, maybe. Right, thirdly, now, this is always a moment that starts a debate around streaming services, as if we needed any more debates about streaming services and how much they pay out. But Spotify has revealed that it's paid out more than £860 million for British artists' music over the last year. It's also responded to something which has been worrying us a little bit recently, and we've seen happening elsewhere in the world, certainly in Australia, which is that big American stars are starting to squeeze out local artists in the UK. But talk us through the headlines first and the figures, Stuart.
Yeah, sure. So these were figures that came out just before the BRIT Awards. That was the timing of it. And yeah, the usual caveat, this is money paid out to the labels and distributors, not to the artist directly. So how much the artist got of that depends on their deals. But yeah, 860 million quid. That's up 6% on the previous year. So it's growth. It's more than double what Spotify paid out in 2018, although that's because the service itself has grown.
Yeah.
So that's, and they were very keen to talk about the long tail. So they said that more than 150 UK artists generated more than £1 million each of payouts last year from their music. And when I talked to Andy Sloan-Vincent, who's the head of music in Europe and the UK, he was saying that's not all superstars. Some of that is folk artists. Some of it is featured artists on dance records. It's kind of quite a wide spread of people.
Right.
And the two other stats, more than 3/4 of the royalties came from people listening outside the UK, because that's something Spotify is very keen to talk about, is that how British music is actually translating, going around the world. And then 45% came from independent music versus major label acts. And then the other thing, this is where we can talk about, ties into what we've been talking about before. They said that British artists accounted for more than a third of the tracks in Spotify's daily top 50 chart last year. So the tracks that got into that chart, more than a third of them from British artists. And that was up 8 percentage points on the year before. So I guess it went from about 25% to 33%, which is part of them saying, look, this is increasing. Because a lot of our worries have been like, there's no British artists in the charts, in different various charts.
Yeah.
But so Spotify says that's actually growing again, which is one of those stats that it can mean a lot of different things. So Olivia Dean may have accounted for a lot of tracks in the charts. Like big artists often hog the top spots. So it's not the same as saying a lot of artists. It might be a few artists with lots of tracks each. And then the American thing. So yeah, I did this interview and I made a point of asking this chap, Andy, like what is happening, American artists dominating our algorithms and things. And he said the opposite. He said they've seen a slight dip in US consumption. And the quote was, we've seen a decline over the last couple of years in the consumption of American music in the UK. And I thought that was quite interesting because it's when it gets what my expectation was. Although I guess this could be as much about growth in listening to, I don't know, Korean music or Nigerian music.
I think this is the point, isn't it? Because with the rise of people like Bad Bunny, it doesn't necessarily mean there's more UK music being listened to. If the Americans, it's only down slightly, isn't it? American listening figures, but in other territories, other international artists, if that's going up as well. They're probably eating into a little bit of the American artist presence, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was trying to get, and actually, I did ask this question, and he was very sort of open about not knowing, like that 150 artists making more than £1 million, which is kind of an arbitrary cutoff, really, because the 151st will be making 975,000. You know, it's not. But I'd love to know how that compares to the heyday of CDs. And earlier in streaming, like, is that number growing in the streaming area? But also, how many artists would have been making that much in the 1990s? And I've got no idea. I couldn't tell you whether it's bigger, smaller, much bigger, much smaller. But that, I guess, is the key. Like, because the story, the line from Spotify is, this is not just the big stars making lots of money and everyone else is struggling. They want to talk about this long tail.
Yeah.
The other thing, the fun thing,
that's very dangerous for Spotify, though, isn't it? Because we know that further down you get to the newer artists, they really aren't getting hardly a bean. And in fact, Spotify don't even pay out when you get past a certain level of not having a lot of plays. So I understand what they're trying to do by saying, oh yeah, it's not just Coldplay, it's more, there are loads of other artists, but that's true. But you've got to be at a certain level, you've got to have a certain presence, haven't you? You've got to be surely you've got to be almost arena size.
Well, that's it. I mean, streaming it's a real winners and losers economy, isn't it? Like there are artists in that 150 who are making £1 million who'd be delighted with how streaming's done for them.
Yeah.
And then there are artists outside that who are really struggling. So yeah, on a more fun note, we were talking about the exports thing. So one serious point was that apparently the top 5 Spotify countries for listening to British music, Brazil and Mexico are now in that now. And so for all we often talk about how artists from Latin America are becoming more popular over here, it seems to be working the other way as well. Like the British music is doing well there.
Yeah,
and the other thing is,
again, sorry, just to stop. Yeah. But again, this is slightly skewed. I understand what they're trying to say, but I think at the same time, I wonder whether the British artists that are being listened to in those countries are Oasis, and it's a lot of heritage acts, whereas we're picking up on a lot of new artists from different territories, while the export is actually bands who were popular here 10, 20, even 30 years ago.
Yeah, and this is something we're going to get into, I think, because there's a quite a positive path forward where if you're a young Brazilian kid listening to Oasis, at some point maybe you get played new bands that you might like from the UK. That would be a kind of a nice world where that catalogue listing does lead to that. The other thing he pointed me towards that I really like this one. I don't know if you heard about Indonesian Britpop clubs?
I have not. Tell us about
a viral
Indonesian Britpop clubs.
It's a viral video doing the rounds of this. I think it's a particular set of promoters in Indonesia who've launched this series of Britpop nights.
Right. And
the videos they're posting are basically all these Indonesian teenagers launching pints in the air to the Stone Roses and singing along to Wonderwall. And again, that plays into your point about, is this heritage music, not new band?
Absolutely.
But it's really, it was a little touch. I was like, wow, there is some really interesting things going on around the world with British music. It's just something that if you're a new band, you maybe don't feel you're part of this yet.
I think this brings us on to, this is something actually which we've been thinking about a lot recently, and we've had quite a few chats off air about this, prompted by a conversation which I had with Annabella Coldrick, who's the CEO of the Music Managers Forum, who's a previous guest on this programme. You may have heard Annabella on the show a while back. But yes, we should start any other business with this, I think, which is, it's all about passive listening on streaming services and the effect that it's having on music and the music industry. And it does feel, I think it's really quite timely to talk about this after that Spotify report, after the BPI's annual report, and after the BRIT Awards on Saturday, all celebrating what's good about British music. But particularly with the Brits, I don't know whether all that pomp and the celebration, does that hide the fact that British music, certainly new British music, might not be doing as well as people would have us believe, and how has streaming affected the popularity of UK music, not just abroad, as you mentioned, but here? The worrying thing, I think, is more about what it's doing to our music habits within our own country. Annabella, by the way, has written a piece about this, which we'll post a link to. But where should we start? Well, I guess shall we explain what we mean by passive listening for a start? Even that's not crystal clear. There's not a perfect definition. But passive listening for me is you put on a playlist or you play a song, and then the algorithm suggests another song, and you leave it, and you're quite happy listening to whatever music you're given.
Essentially, you're leaning, and sometimes it's called lean back listening. You're leaning back and you're being played stuff, which is something you could apply to radio, traditional radio, as well as streaming. But yeah, essentially, you're not choosing what to play, and it's happening often in the background of what you're doing, whether you're cooking, exercising, whatever. And it's just being talked about a lot, I think. I mean, in fact, I remember 10 years ago, people were worrying about this, saying, are we going to turn into a whole nation of passive listeners where we don't really sit forward and listen and figure out who's playing, even, let alone how to go and investigate them?
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of our listeners will say, well, I always choose what to listen to. You know, I'm always looking for things, proactively listening to music. But it seems, I think the majority of streamers are, and fair play to them, just happy to listen to whatever chosen music is pumped out in playlist form for them, because the figures are astonishing. From Annabella's piece, there's a quote of a report from last year which suggests that 75% of music streamers usually listen in a passive way. That's 3/4 of people using streaming services are just listening to whatever's put in front of them.
Yeah, usually, which is interesting. So I was thinking about my own listening and thinking, how often do I listen passively? Because a lot of the time I spend with music is when I'm working or when so I guess I'm part of those people as well, even though I consider myself an active music fan. So it is a bit nuanced. But yeah, I mean, I was looking up some stats because this is something that no streaming service really puts out, these stats, because I think they know it's quite a hot potato. They don't want to be seen as somewhere. But a few years ago, 2022, so caveat, it's a few years old, the UK's competition watchdog did a report, and it actually went and asked all the services where does your listening come from? I think it found that the biggest chunk was from people's own playlists that they'd made. And that was about 42% of listening from people's own playlists. Now, that's still, you might turn on your playlist of favourite songs this year and then let it wash over you. So you've actively created the playlist, but you may be passively listening to it. But around 20% came from playlists created by the streaming services. We're just putting play. And around 11% came from those autoplay or radio style features where it literally is hit a button, start the streaming music. So about a third, I think, in those days was the plan. But what we don't know is how that's changed. But I think in the last 2 to 3 years, quite a few of the new features launched by streaming services have been about making it easier to listen passively in a way. Like the new AI playlist where you type in a text prompt saying, I'm going to the gym and want some up-tempo drum and bass music. And it makes you a playlist and you play it. Yeah. So my instinct would be that maybe it's increased in that passive listening, but then no one actually puts out those figures.
This is the thing is with the increase though in passive listening, and if it is getting to the levels that some people are reporting, there's at least 2 problems with this potentially. I think one, obviously, this puts tremendous power in the hands of the algorithms that help dictate what people get to hear, and 2, it's the way the algorithms work and which artists they lean towards. Because that's the worry, I think, because within UK speaking pop music territories, everyone apart from America seems to be doing less well in terms of promoting their own music, because it's the big artists from America who come around time and time again. Taylor Swift, Sabrina Carpenter, all these people will be coming around constantly on a passive streaming circuit. So that's the worry, though, isn't it? Because then if we are, and I know, they're saying, okay, there's Spotify saying, for instance, there is a slight rise in UK music, but it's nowhere close. Our representation of the music in the UK is nowhere close to what it is in other countries. Like in Italy, 80% of the music which is being pumped out is Italian. But unfortunately, we're up against the States. That's a problem.
Well, that's it. This thing happens. And now you're seeing a lot of positivity in Italy, in France, and Germany, because they've got thriving local scenes doing very well. I had a few things to say about this. I mean, one of them is that these streaming algorithms, they are completely mysterious. We don't know how they work. Even their companies, I'm not sure how they work.
Yeah.
I had a funny thing once. I won't name it. A big newspaper site changed its website sort of address and had a meeting with Google to say, what does this mean? Are we going to suddenly disappear off your search engine? And essentially the Google guys were like, wow, we're really interested to find out too. We have no idea what our algorithm will do in response to this. And to some extent, streaming is the same. This is a mysterious beast. But if you listen to loads of new British music, you'll get recommended more of it. If you hammer Taylor Swift, you'll get recommended more US megastar music. So to some extent, it's going to be different for every individual, and it's very hard to measure. There's no way of measuring what's being recommended to who, if that makes sense. And that's one of the reasons it's such a difficult subject, because there aren't hard and fast figures saying, yes, Apple Music recommends 75% of its recommendations are American bands because it's so individual. So that's one thing that's difficult. And the other thing I think is the different kinds of passive listening. So if you are listening to just the autoplay feature and you're getting loads of Sabrina Carpenter or Taylor Swift, that's one thing. If you're following a playlist that's like some human within Spotify or Apple Music, picking the latest great British bands, you're going to hear all of those in your passive listening cycle. So to some extent, it depends where you're listening and how you're listening. And so it's very, very complicated, if that makes sense, which to come back to this blog post by Annabelle, it's hard to know what to do about it, because one thing people suggest is there should be quotas on this sort of thing. The government should place quotas and say, Spotify, you have to play this much British music to your listeners. And that is unlike radio, where you can measure what Radio 1 plays in a week, or TV, where you can say how much percentage of shows on the BBC are from British people. I don't know how you're ever going to be able to measure this in streaming. So it's very hard to know how, from the outside, you change this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what can be done? I mean, that's the next thing, isn't it? Any thoughts on this, by the way? Drop us a line. The email address is coming up later. I think for starters, that needs to be a conversation about it. I think that more people need to be aware. And because if we have got to the stage where of the top 40 singles for 2025, within the top 40, there's only 10 tracks featuring UK acts. And it might not be our time. Is it too arrogant to believe that Britain should still rule pop music globally? but you would hope that we were producing enough UK acts to at least have more than 10 in the top 40. And there's only, if you extend that out, according to Annabella's piece, the UK top 100, only around 20% of the tracks were performed by British artists. So there must be something we can do before it starts getting worse and we end up like where Australia are, where it's estimated that for every $10 spent on music or put into the streaming pot, $9 goes straight away, leaves the country immediately. And that's not a position we want to be in. How do we promote? As you say, it's difficult when we don't with the mysterious algorithms, but how do we promote more British music into in a way that, I don't want to bias, I don't want to dictate what people necessarily listen to, but what the question I think we're all asking is, Does it work properly? Are we being unfairly locked out? Is there something we can do about it?
Well, also, and you mentioned this idea about we need to have a discussion. This is something that's happened in Australia, where when people started talking about it, and almost also politicians started kind of rumbling about maybe we need to have quotas, do something. Spotify, as one of the biggest thing, it pushed back quite hard and they said, look, we do a lot to promote Australian acts. And look, we're launching a new thing now called Turn Up Oz, which is the campaign to kind of push Australian music, And I think the other day, and I can't find the stat, but they talked about how it created, I think it was 223 million more streams of local music. But they only launched this campaign because they were under pressure from this discussion. Mm-hmm. So I think that is maybe a positive thing, is that the more people talk about this and say, what can we do? It does encourage the streaming services to say, well, actually, here's something we could do. And we can actually do more, and then it can work. So I think that's part of it. I think it's the positive way forward is actually, talking about it, raising it, asking hard questions. And then the streaming services, I think they understand that they don't want to have governments telling them what to play and how much to play. So they will find other things they can do, and that hopefully will benefit local artists everywhere.
We did promise we would answer at least one of our listener questions this week, so I think we can just about fit this in. A question from listener Liam from Bolton, who writes, "Hi Stu and Steve, really enjoying the show. Bless you, thank you very much for listening. I have a question for Steve about plugging. It's a phrase I hear often, but it all seems a bit mysterious. I understand it's someone pitching an artist to a DJ or producer, but how does it work? Why do artists need plugging? And how is this process different to, say, you, Steve, discovering an artist or a song via other channels, or an artist contacting you directly?" Thank you very much, Liam. I did shy away from this question for a little while because anyone who knows me will know I have quite a lot to say on the subject of radio plugging and what makes a good radio plugger. But I think maybe that will keep for another day before we enter that particular minefield. But it's a good question. So look, I'll try to explain it as simply as I can, because there are different forms of radio plugging. So a radio plugger, sometimes known as a radio promotions person, it is essentially they are the representative of a band or an artist when it comes to all things radio. So this could be at one end of the scale, fielding calls from radio shows and emails, incessant emails asking one of your artists to do something, to come in. I mean, it might be that it might be your job just to be the person who says no if you're dealing with a very famous act, and then then it's organising interviews or sessions, or obviously the further down the scale we get, once you get to new acts, basically if you're working a brand new band, you're just trying to generate some interest really for your act with amongst DJs or radio show producers. But say top end of the scale, if you take the Foo Fighters, who just returned with a new single, or someone like the Arctic Monkeys or Fontaine's DC, once everyone sits there, there's a new record coming. So once the release date of the new record is set, then the radio plugger will sit down and discuss a plan with the band, or probably the manager. And together, they will work out the best way to maximise coverage of that record on the radio. And that will be obviously across numerous radio stations. So you're trying to balance out your coverage across various radio networks. So they'll probably offer the first play of a single to one station, another station might get a session. Then they'll work out who's going to get the interviews and when they'll run on air to, as I say, have maximum impact and provide a good spread of coverage. While at the same time, as I say, because Dave Grohl can't be everywhere all the time, you will, as the radio person, probably be the one who's gently declining offers from stations who aren't deemed to be a priority at that point. That's the top end. At the other end of the scale, a lot of pluggers' work is involved in attempting to help launch new artists or help emerging artists. And obviously that's much harder, isn't it? Because radio stations like booking big hitters. They're less interested in a group who'll sell 50 tickets on a Tuesday night in Hull, because they're not a big draw for their listeners. So I won't name it. I won't cite a specific example, but say, for instance, hypothetically, you have a band, they've had an EP out, and now they're releasing a new single. It is then the plugger's job to what they call service the record to anyone in radio that they think might be interested, and then say attempt to build up support for the group by making a case as to why the DJ should play the record, or possibly, you then get to the point of trying to persuade, the music team, the playlist committee at whatever radio station it is, that they've reached the stage where and made a record which deserves to go on the playlists. So it's basically putting the artist in front of radio and then trying to explain what's good about them. That's it. That's radio plugging. Sorry, Lee, in answer to a couple of other bits of your question, why do bands need pluggers? Well, if, as I say, you're a reasonably successful band, then you'll need someone to act as a bridge between you, the band, and all the people at radio who want you to do stuff. But also, you need them sometimes just for their expertise in, guarding your profile at radio. So that's top. And if you're a newer band, pluggers can be helpful in bringing artists to radio's attention. And the reason why people sometimes turn to pluggers is in the hope that the radio plugger, because you, the artist, don't know anyone in radio. In theory, the radio plugger has built relationships with producers or DJs to the point where they can just email them and say, look, I found this group. I think they're good. Give them a listen. That's the idea. Radio is, inundated with music now, as I'm sure you can imagine. So it's how do you get in front of a producer or DJ? Well, it's employing someone who has the right contacts and can put a word in for you. That's the theory. But of course, it does cost you money, and there is no guarantee of success. Really, at the bottom end of the scale, if you've made a really good record, then you've got a chance of getting on the radio. If you've made an interesting record, you might have a chance of getting on the radio if you're in the right place at the right time. And that's what I guess pluggers are trying to point out to people in the radio industry. But there's never really any guarantee, I don't think, if you're a brand new act, that someone's going to play your record, even if it has been plugged to radio by someone you've employed to do it. But final question. How is this process different to Steve discovering an artist or song via other channels, or an artist contacting him directly? The answer is it's not really that different. I'm only talking purely from my own point of view. I can't speak for other DJs or producers and how they work, but obviously we get, as I say, an awful lot of music sent to us each week, even by radio pluggers. And when I say an awful lot, last week that was over 150 singles, of which I'll listen to the ones that have been sent to me by people I trust first. They get the first hearing. Right, we'll do those, and then obviously I do a lot of my own research online, or often you bump into people at gigs who recommend artists to you, or friends who I know in the industry, managers or promoters who will also give you tips of things that they think are good, or maybe going somewhere. And then there's the artists themselves who send in stuff, and I still get quite a lot of I get emails obviously from artists at the BBC sending us music, but also still get quite a lot of physical records, CDs even. And I love nothing more than a nice letter from a band, if I'm honest, because a nice letter from a band, handwritten if possible, describing who they are and what they do, just makes their music so much more human than your bog standard press release, I think. So anyway, music comes from all over the place. In fact, if I don't know if this helps, but if you look back over the past 10 years, I was thinking about this morning, because we've just passed the 10th anniversary of me seeing Idols for the first time. But you go back over the past decade, Idols Fontaine's DC, I mean, more recently, Little Grandad, none of these groups had radio pluggers when I first started playing them. So it's not essential for our show. Across the broader radio network, you might find that it's a bit different, and you may well need a radio plugger to open the right doors for you. But as I say, that's a conversation for another day, I think. I've got quite a lot I could say about the pros and cons of radio plugging, but I think it will keep for now. We're nearly out of time. So finally for this week, if you've come to the conclusion, possibly from what you've heard in this show, that, Spotify is helping or sometimes killing music, well, at least it's now giving us somewhere to store the ashes. But there is a price, Stuart.
There certainly is. This is the Eternal Playlist Urn, which is an actual urn that has a Bluetooth speaker built into the lid. And this is a marketing partnership with Liquid Death, who I want to describe them as fizzy water, and I'd probably get in trouble for that. There's probably some other highfalutin words used about it, but it's kind of fizzy water in a can, isn't it? Liquid Death.
Okay.
And they got in there. So only 150 of these urns have been released, and they cost $495 each.
Okay.
Which I'm thinking, okay, how many of those 100, because they've sold out, I think, already. How many of what people have actually said, yes, when I die, I want to store my ashes in a branded Bluetooth speaker urn? And how many of it's people going, this might go on for $300, for $1,000 on eBay next week, so I'll buy one to speculate. But yeah, if you want to store your ashes in an urn with Spotify on it, you're too late, but you might be able to get one on eBay next week.
And that's where we'll leave it. Thank you very much for listening. If you are enjoying the show, please do spread the word. You can also support us via Patreon. In fact, if you sign up to be a super fan, you can get to join us for our weekly lock-in, where some of you get to stay behind after hours for an extra 15, 20 minutes of bonus material, which will include this week, actually, based on that, we should do songs that we're going to have played at our funeral, also some reflections, I imagine, on the Brits, and one or two more observations about radio plugging, possibly. That's coming up. If you'd like to gain access to the lock-in, you can by becoming a superfan of the show at patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. Alternatively, as with Liam, do get in touch with us if you've got any questions or anything which we might be able to explain from behind the scenes in the music industry. If there's anything that you've always thought, how does that work, or what does that cost? We might be the people to give you the answer. We'll do our best. Drop us a line with any thoughts or questions. The Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com. That's the Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com. Until next week, take care. Cheerio.
Goodbye.